Like many others, I did not see it coming. But William is a scientist, and he saw it coming. He saw it sooner than I did, is what I mean. Hello. I've finished reading Elizabeth Strout's new novel, Lucy by the Sea, the continuation of her Lucy Barton series. Don't these books look so lovely all lined up next to each other? I get such a geeky satisfaction about seeing them all together on my shelf, these UK editions of the book. And this was a great reading experience, and I think it even enhanced my appreciation, or developed my appreciation, of the previous book, Oh, William, which I felt quite mixed about, or ambivalent about, ever since it was published a year ago. I read it when it first came out, and I really enjoyed the experience. I mean, I love Elizabeth Strout's writing overall, but I felt a bit mixed about this book, and especially since it was shortlisted for this year's Booker Prize. I've been very vocal about how, like, really, this book? But now that I've read this new novel, I really think it has enhanced my appreciation of this previous book, and probably reading both of these books together, I'll love them even more, because this is very much a sequel to Oh, William. It follows Lucy Barton's experiences and continuing evolution of her relationship with William, who was her first husband, who she divorced from after he had an affair on her, and she married again, but her second husband died, and so she's still dealing with her grief about that. But then it's also about the recent times, and when the pandemic came to the United States, and William, in an attempt to protect Lucy, gets her to move with him to Maine, to this borrowed house on the coast of Maine, where they shelter together. They go into lockdown together, and so they're sort of forced to be together and reckon with their relationship. But it's also, of course, very much about Lucy Barton's own continuing process of examining her past and her experience and her understanding of what her personality is and her relationship to the world. And so it's this very intense period of lockdown together, which we can all relate to and experience. And yes, this is another lockdown novel dealing with the experiences of the recent past. But now, having read it, and how it follows on from Oh, William, and develops Lucy Barton's voice and way of approaching and understanding, or trying to make sense of the world around her and her relationship to it. I understand her story so much better, but I don't know, maybe it's just because I just read this book, or maybe it's the circumstances under which I read it that is like made me even more enthusiastic about Lucy Barton now, because I read this, I just got back from a road trip, a very long road trip around the Pacific Northwest with my partner, where we drove almost 3,000 miles around the Pacific Northwest. My partner, my husband, he loves to drive, and while he's driving, I love to read aloud to him. So we had a lot of time to read different stories, but also this entire novel. So I read this entire novel aloud to him while he was driving us around to all these beautiful locations, and so we very much experienced the book together, and it makes it much different experience reading a book aloud than just reading it to yourself, because as I was reading it aloud, we were laughing together at certain parts, like Elizabeth Strout often does in her books. She kind of makes these jovial jibes at the state of Maine, which I grew up in, and so I'm very familiar with. And so she makes these little jokes about the state of, like, how incredibly cold it gets there. And so so Lucy is like very chilled at one point, and William is like, well, it's Maine, Lucy, what do you expect? And so I appreciate that. But then, there's also aspects of that. Lucy has a particular abhorrence to being cold, for issues to do with her childhood, and so it has an emotional resonance as well. But Elizabeth Strout also doesn't shy from looking at some darker aspects of Maine life and how certain members of certain citizens in the state of Maine can be quite insular and can be even hostile to people from outside of the state, and so she covers that in this novel as well. But yeah, we would also gasp together at certain parts when I was reading it aloud, that because there are many shocking revelations in this, there are many surprises, there are many suspenseful elements. I think more than any of the books, she really draws the reader along through the plot, because she sort of seeds throughout it, like of how things will never be the same again, or she might never see someone again after this point. Lucy Barton is narrating this in retrospect, and so is looking back on this very intense period of lockdown and changes to do in her family life, but also further revelations to do with her past and with certain members of her family, and really reckoning with her own experience, and like I said, trying to understand her position in the world, which just there's such a humanity to these books and the way that Elizabeth Strout writes about this character. And so yeah, it might be that I because of this experience of reading this book aloud, that it felt especially poignant to me, but also following the character of Lucy Barton throughout these different books. I mean, it's been several years now since My Name is Lucy Barton first came out, and much like in the experience of watching a sitcom for a long period of time. How if you watch a sitcom for a long period of time, you start to age while the actors who are playing these characters in this sitcom start to age, and so you're aging alongside them, and so it adds this level of poignancy and this feeling of connection you have with these characters over time, because you've been changing over time, and Lucy Barton has been changing over the course of these novels. And so we're following her here later in her life, when she's at a really uncertain period, because she is grieving for her second husband, but also has this newfound connection with William, her first husband, who she sort of reconnected with in the events of O. William, when he found out about a member of his family he didn't know existed, and so went to try to reconnect with her. But then in this book, that storyline is continued as well as events to do with Lucy's adult daughters, who are going through their own issues and struggles. And so yeah, there are a lot of things going on in this novel, which is almost ironic because it's a long period of stasis during lockdown, when there are months and months of seemingly nothing much happening. She gets into a routine of going for walks or meeting certain people, but then it develops these relationships in a much more intense way, in a slightly unnatural way from so-called ordinary life. But then she looks at how maybe aspects of sort of lockdown life are ordinary life. And so it does develop this poignancy of looking at our recent times and things that we have all gone through in the past few years, as well as looking at Lucy's character in particular, who came from a very deprived, very difficult background, had a very difficult relationship with members of her immediate family, and that is developed even more in this novel, in her relationship to her brother and sister, but also memories of her mother, who did die a while ago, but who is still very much present in her mind, and whose voice is still in her mind, and memories of her past with her mother are still very much there, of things her mother said, which were either cruel or surprisingly insightful, or which she feels like she understands better now that she herself is older and has grown to understand the point of view of where her mother was coming from. So yeah, I found all that very meaningful and moving, and the way in which Elizabeth Strout has really refined Lucy Barton's voice in this. She has certain rhythms of speech in which she talks or writes or reflects on her own experience, of focusing on very specific moments which come to feel profound in a certain way, or have a certain meaning which extends beyond, the circumstances of that particular moment, and there are aspects of Lucy's character which, even though I feel very endeared towards her and really love her in a lot of ways, but also can find her quite irritating, because she is so reflective, she is so ambivalent about her own experience. She is also doesn't have very much self-esteem, but that very much has risen out of her childhood and her experience of not feeling valued as a child, but then as an adult, sort of entering into larger society, which she's didn't really feel a part of when she was younger, still doesn't feel a part of, perpetually feels like an outsider. And so I can really relate to that experience, but also I find it quite irritating that she doesn't just get over these things, and so there's this like duality to my feelings to her, which I think probably a lot of people will feel reading about this character, and I think which is quite intentional on Elizabeth Strout's part of writing her character. So she is infused with this deep complexity and ambiguity, and which makes her feel very human, very real. And so following her over this period of time, over the course of all of these books, I've grown to feel really close to her. And one of the most poignant aspects of this book is when in a section when Lucy reflects how, we never know when we're going to have a final moment with someone. We never know when we're going to have this final experience that we might have had with somebody over and over again. That might be the last time we see them, the last time we have an encounter with them. And this might be the last time we see Lucy Barton in fictional form. Elizabeth Strout might not write about her ever again. And so that adds a level of poignancy to this book as well, having followed her character throughout all of these books. So, the question of whether this could be a standalone book. It definitely can be read on its own. Elizabeth Strout gives lots of information and clues to of things that occurred in these past books, sort of catching you up on what happened before, or what you might have forgot from reading the previous books, because the other two books came out quite a while ago, and she seeds in different information about that. So she tips you off to that, and you will be able to read this as a complete story on its own, just like you could read O. William all on its own. But I definitely think it benefits from having read all of these books and following Lucy's journey throughout all of these different stories and throughout this period of time, and especially O. William. But it is a weird thing almost, that it's like, oh yeah, I think I understand and appreciate this novel more now, having read this most recent novel, and I can see how you could still make the argument of well, this really isn't a standalone book then, if its poignancy can't be fully felt without having read this next installment. Maybe if these two books were published together, then it would be a whole complete book, and someday I can imagine a beautiful omnibus edition of all four of these books all together, and then you could read them all sequentially. But yeah, I think they do all stand up on their own as well. So I mean, these are just sort of, it gets to be semantics after a while, like of whether this is a single book or it's a complete series. I mean, the way that Elizabeth Strout has created this fictional universe kind of extends beyond, the first and last page of the book, I think, and that's part of the wonderful thing about the experience of these books and why they're so well written, because they have this resonance and this feeling, beyond the covers of them. I feel like Lucy Barton is someone I really know now, and that I could just see down the street, and I feel like she probably has that sense for Elizabeth Strout herself. I've not listened to Strout talking about this most recent book yet, but I get that sort of feeling, because not only does this new book make reference to the previous Lucy Barton books, but it also makes reference to characters from Elizabeth Strout's other books enter into this novel, and Lucy Barton has interactions with some of these characters from some of Elizabeth Strout's completely separate novels. So you feel like you've completely entered Elizabeth Strout's like fictional universe, this alternate reality she's created for these characters in which to understand our recent times, particular to do with Lucy Barton's experience, but also larger issues to do with the meaning of love and relationships and the complexity of relationships, especially long-term relationships over time, how our connections to people change over a long period of time. The way she's mapped this throughout this books, I think, is so masterful, but also a larger examination of the country of United States in general, and the changes going on in the country, and how Lucy Barton navigates that as someone who has come from a impoverished or poor background to then enter into the middle classes and to inhabit this very like liberal section of society, and so her feelings about the politically divided country are very ambivalent, and she can kind of see both sides of the story, but at the same time has very particular views of her own. And I think it's so masterful how and human how she shows about her character, that she comes to have certain revelations and thinks she understands things more clearly, but then at the same time acknowledges that she doesn't really know anything and can't be certain about any of these things, and that changes are still going to continue to occur, and even though it comes to a semi-happy conclusion at the end, things are still open-ended. She's not entirely sure if this is the life that she wants for herself going forward, and I love the open-endedness that Elizabeth Strout has created in this story. So yeah, I very much enjoyed this. It very much enhanced my appreciation of O. William. I might have to go back and reevaluate whether I think it is, deserving a place on the Booker shortlist or not. But, regardless of prizes or anything else, this is such a great reading experience, and I would recommend all of these books and Elizabeth Strout's writing in general. And if you have the chance to read these books aloud to a loved one or a family member or a friend, I think it will enhance the experience even more for you, because it's written in a very straightforward prose style, very easy to read, and I think which lends itself to being read aloud in this way. So yeah, I just wanted to rattle off my feelings about having read this now, but I'd love to know if you've read this most recent book yet, or if you're planning to read it now, if you've read the other Lucy Barton novels, or if you want to go back and read them all now, or if you have any thoughts about other things that I've talked about. I'd love to know about that in the comments below, and we can have a chat about this series and geek out about it some more. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.